One of the most onerous controls placed on American citizens is the control of speech through politically correct legislation. Derogatory remarks or off-color jokes are justification for firings, demotions, and destruction of political careers. The movement toward designating penalties based on the category to which victims belong rather than the nature of the crime itself has the thought police patrolling the airways and the byways. Establishing relative rights and special penalties for subjective motivation is a dangerous trend. All our financial activities are subject to legal searches without warrants and without probable cause. Tax collection, drug usage, and possible terrorist activities justify the endless accumulation of information on all Americans. Government control of medicine has prompted the establishment of the National Medical Data Bank. For efficiency reasons, it is said the government keeps our medical records for our benefit. This, of course, is done with vague and useless promises that this information will always remain confidential, just like all the FBI information in the past. Personal privacy, the sine qua non of liberty, no longer exists in the United States. Ruthless and abusive use of all this information accumulated by the government is yet to come. The Patriot Act has given unbelievable power to listen, read, and monitor all our transactions without a search warrant being issued after affirmation or probable cause. Sneak and peek and blanket searches are now becoming more frequent every day. What have we allowed to happen to the Fourth Amendment? It may be true that the average American does not feel intimidated by the encroachment of the police state. I'm sure our citizens are more tolerant of what they see as mere nuisances because they have been deluded into believing all this government supervision is necessary and helpful, and besides, they are living quite comfortably material-wise. However, the reaction will be different once all this new legislation we're passing comes into full force and the material comforts that soften our concerns for government regulations are decreased. This attitude then will change dramatically, but the trend toward the authoritarian state will be difficult to reverse. What government gives with one hand as it attempts to provide safety and security, it must at the same time take away with two others. When the majority recognizes that the monetary costs and the results of our war against terrorism and personal freedoms are a lot less than promised, it may be too late. I'm sure all my concerns are unconvincing to the vast majority of Americans who do not only seek but also demand they be made safe from any possible attack from anybody ever. I grant you, this is a reasonable request. The point is, though, however, there may be a much better way of doing it. We must remember we don't sit around and worry that some Canadian citizen is about to walk into New York and set off a nuclear weapon. We must come to understand the real reason is that there's a difference between the Canadians and all our many friends and the Islamic radicals. And believe me, we're not the target because we're free and prosperous. The argument made for more government controls here at home and expansionism overseas to combat terrorism is simple and goes like this. If we're not made safe from potential terrorists, property and freedom have no meaning. It is argued that first we must have life and physical and economic security with continued abundance, then we'll talk about freedom. It reminds me of the time I was soliciting political support from a voter and was boldly put down. Ron, she said, I wish you would lay off this freedom stuff. It's all nonsense. We're looking for a representative who will know how to bring home the bacon and help our area, and you're not that person. Believe me, I understand that argument. It's just that I don't agree that it's what should be motivating us here in the Congress. That's not the way it works. Freedom does not preclude security. Making security the highest priority can deny prosperity and still fail to provide the safety we all want. The Congress would never agree that we are a police state. Most members, I'm sure, would argue for the negative. But we are all obligated to decide in which direction we are going. If we're moving toward a system that enhances individual liberty and justice for all, my concerns about a police state should be reduced or totally ignored. Yet, if by chance we're moving toward more authoritarian control than is good for us and moving toward a major war of which we should have no part, we should not ignore the dangers. If current policies are permitting a serious challenge to our institutions that allow for our great abundance, we ignore them at great risk for future generations. That's why the post-9/11 analysis and subsequent legislation are crucial to the survival of those institutions that made America great. We now are considering a major legislative proposal dealing with this dilemma, the new Department of Homeland Security, and we must decide if it truly serves the interests of America. Since the new department is now a foregone conclusion, why should anyone bother to record a dissent? Because it's the responsibility of all of us to speak the truth to the best of our ability, and if there are reservations about what we're doing, we should sound an alarm and warn the people of what is likely to come. In times of crises, nearly unanimous support for government programs is usual, and the effects are instantaneous. Discovering the errors of our ways and waiting to see the unintended consequences evolve takes time and careful analysis. Reversing the bad effects is slow and tedious and fraught with danger. People would much prefer to hear platitudes than the pessimism of a flawed policy. Understanding the real reason why we were attacked is crucial to deriving a proper response. I know of no one who does not condemn the attacks of 9/11. Disagreeing as to the cause and the proper course of action should be legitimate in a free society such as ours. If not, we're not a free society. Not only do I condemn the vicious acts of 9/11, but also out of deep philosophic and moral commitment, I have pledged never to use any form of aggression to bring about social or economic changes. But I am deeply concerned about what has been done and what we are yet to do in the name of security against the threat of terrorism. Political propagandizing is used to get all of us to toe the line and be good patriots, supporting every measure suggested by the administration. We are told that preemptive strikes, torture, military tribunals, suspension of habeas corpus, executive orders to wage war, and sacrificing privacy with a weakened Fourth Amendment are the minimum required to save our country from a threat of terrorism. Who's winning this war anyway? To get popular support for these serious violations of our traditional rule of law requires that people be kept in a state of fear. The episode of spreading the undue concern about the possibility of a dirty bomb being exploded in Washington without any substantiation of an actual threat is a good example of excessive fear being generated by government officials. To add insult to injury, when he made this outlandish announcement, our Attorney General was in Moscow. Maybe if our FBI spent more time at home, we would get more for our money we pump into this now discredited organization. Our FBI should be gathering information here at home, and the thousands of agents overseas should return. We don't need these agents competing overseas and confusing the intelligence apparatus of the CIA or the military. I'm concerned that the excess fear created by the several hundreds of al-Qaeda functionaries willing to sacrifice their lives for their demented goals is driving us to do to ourselves what the al-Qaeda themselves could never do to us by force. So far, the direction is clear. We are legislating bigger and more intrusive government here at home and are allowing our president to pursue much more military adventurism abroad. These pursuits are overwhelmingly supported by members of Congress, the media, and the so-called intellectual community, and questioned only by a small number of civil libertarians, anti-imperial, anti-war advocates. The main reason why so many usually level-headed critics of bad policy accept this massive increase in government power is clear. They, for various reasons, believe the official explanation of why us. The several hundreds of al-Qaeda members, we were told, hate us because we're rich, we're free, and we enjoy materialism, and the purveyors of terror are jealous and envious, creating the hatred that drives their cause. They despise our Christian Judaic values, and this, it is argued, is the sole reason why they are willing to die for their cause. For this to be believed, one must also be convinced that the perpetrators lied to the world about why they attacked us. The al-Qaeda leaders say they hate us because we support Western puppet regimes in Arab countries for commercial reasons and against the wishes of the populace of those countries. This partnership allows military occupation, the most confrontational being in Saudi Arabia, that offends the sense of pride and violates their religious convictions to have a foreign military power on their holy land. We refuse to consider how we might feel if China's Navy occupied the Gulf of Mexico for the purpose of protecting their oil and had air bases on U.S. territory. We show extreme bias in support of one side in the 50-plus-year war going on in the Middle East. That is their explanation. What if the al-Qaeda is telling the truth and we ignore it? If we believe only the official line from the administration and proceed to change our whole system and undermine our constitutional rights, we may one day wake up to find that the attacks have increased. The numbers of those willing to commit suicide for their cause have grown, our freedoms are diminished, and all this has contributed to making our economic problems worse. The dollar cost of this war could turn out to be exorbitant, and the efficiency of our markets can become undermined by the compromises placed on our liberties. Sometimes it almost seems that our policies inadvertently are actually based on a desire to make ourselves less free and less prosperous, those conditions that are supposed to have prompted the attacks. I'm convinced we must pay more attention to the real cause of the attacks of last year and challenge the explanation given us. The question that one day must be answered is this: what if we had never placed our troops in Saudi Arabia and involved ourselves in the Middle East war in an even-handed fashion? Would it have been worth it if this would have prevented 9/11? If we avoid the truth, we will be far less well off than if we recognize that just maybe the truth lies in the statements made by the leaders of those who perpetuated the atrocities. If they speak the truth about the real cause, changing our foreign policy from foreign military interventionism around the globe, supporting an American empire, would make a lot of sense. It could reduce tension, save money, preserve liberty, and preserve our economic system. This, for me, is not a reactive position coming out of 9/11, but rather an argument I've made for decades, claiming that meddling in the affairs of others is dangerous to our security and actually reduces our ability to defend ourselves. This is in no way precludes pursuing those directly responsible for the attacks and dealing with them accordingly, something that we seem to have not yet done. We hear more talk of starting a war in Iraq than in achieving victory over the international outlaws that instigated the attacks on 9/11. Rather than pursuing war against countries that were not directly responsible for the attacks, we should consider the judicious use of marque and reprisal. I'm sure that a more enlightened approach to our foreign policy will prove elusive. Financial interests of our international corporations, oil companies, and banks, along with the military-industrial complex, are sure to remain a deciding influence on our policies. Besides, even if my assessments prove to be true, any shift away from foreign militarism, like bringing our troops home, would now be construed as yielding to the terrorists. It just won't happen. This is a powerful point, and the concern that we might appear to be capitulating is legitimate. Yet how long should we deny the truth, especially if this denial only makes us more vulnerable? Shouldn't we demand the courage and wisdom of our leaders to do the right thing in spite of the political shortcomings? President Kennedy faced an even greater threat in October of 1962, and from a much more powerful force. The Soviet-Cuban terrorist threat with nuclear missiles only 90 miles off our shores was wisely diffused by Kennedy's capitulating and removing missiles from Turkey on the Soviet border. Kennedy deserved the praise he received for the way he handled this nuclear standoff with the Soviets. This concession most likely prevented a nuclear exchange and proved that taking a step back from a failed policy is beneficial. Yet, how one does so is crucial. The answer is to do it diplomatically. That's what diplomats are supposed to do. Maybe there is no real desire to remove the excuse for our worldwide imperialism, especially our current new expansion into Central Asia or the domestic violations of our civil liberties. Today's conditions may well be exactly what our world commercial interests want. It's now easy for us to go into the Philippines, Colombia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, or wherever in pursuit of terrorists. No questions are asked by the media or the politicians, only cheers. Put in these terms, who can object? We all despise the tactics of the terrorists, so the nature of the response is not to be questioned. A growing number of Americans are concluding that the threat we now face comes more from a consequence of our foreign policy than because the bad guys envy our freedoms and prosperity. How many terrorist attacks have been directed towards Switzerland, Australia, Canada, or Sweden? They are also rich and free and would be easy targets, but the Islamic fundamentalists see no purpose in doing so. There's no purpose in targeting us unless there's a political agenda, which there surely is. To deny that this political agenda exists jeopardizes the security of this country. Pretending something to be true that is not is dangerous.